I can guarantee you this conversation will not be about robots. No robots included. Mostly about emotional experience, right?
I'd like to think so. I'm hopeful.
So this is the famous Toni Roeller that we can't get to this conference, who is here now. So Toni, could you just briefly give us a background, because she's had a really amazing background, and I think I've known you for most of it, but tell everybody about your background, where you come from, some of the things you've done.
This is going to be super brief. This is my least favorite question. I always find it really awkward. I like to talk about the work versus me. Lee is right. I feel like that I met him very, very early on in my career. I've been lucky to work retail, and I think we all know, like, once you get retail in your blood, it's somehow just in your blood. I've been working retail since I was 16. I started out with Levi Strauss and then Best Buy. I think that's where we encountered one another. Then Home Depot, and then most recently, for the past 9 years, with Dick's Sporting Goods. And so it's kind of a fun career in terms of having an opportunity to work with really, really cool brands, amazing people. Certainly the vendor community, which you end up with, instead of having transactions, you end up with real relationships along the way, and they just kind of follow you all the way through. Lee and the WD team was instrumental in some of the early thought work and strategy work around House of Sport, so it seems very apropos that we would be up here together talking about House of Sport.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the plug. Just a little humble brag time. So how are the stores doing now? You have a dozen.
We do.
So you have a dozen of these new House of Sport stores. How are they doing?
Well, I'm going to do just a little bit of background. How many of you have been to a House of Sport? Okay, I see a few hands. And then I know there's some folks out there that are actually working on parts and pieces of House of Sport. I had a chance to talk with you, many of you, last night and yesterday. But I'm going to do just a little bit of background on House of Sport. We actually started this project in 2018, which seems like a little bit of a lifetime ago. And we started it kind of under the guise of, let's start to rethink our brick and mortar experience at a time when we don't have to. If you think back to 2018, everything was about, oh my gosh, the stores need to be smaller. And retail's gotten stale, and everything's going to be going to online. And so, our CEO and founder at the time, he's now chairman of the board, and our chief merchant, he pulled a small group of us together, and he said, what would it look like if we developed the experience that if it opened across the street from one of our stores, it would put us out of business? Which was a really kind of lofty goal, but it was our North Star, and that's what we worked toward. And back then, we actually called the project, because you guys know how it is, all projects have to have pet names, and we called it Ecosystem of the Future, which is not a very sexy hashtag, but internally, what it reminded us was it's not just a brick and mortar experience, it's got to be super connected across all the touch points. And so we worked through, a lot of iterations. As you know, Lee, one of the things that I loved most about the project was we did this iterative design where we put it in front of focus groups and got feedback in terms of what they liked and what they didn't and what they thought about our stores. And sadly, there's nothing any better than when a focus group, holds up the old mirror and says, whoa, you guys are kind of tired. You guys are, tough to shop. You guys aren't particularly user-friendly. And they tell you all the things they don't like, and then you have to figure out the things that they do like and they do want. And we were slated to open our first House of Sport store in September of 2020. I think that for most of us, for me, that's like a black hole. It's just time that was lost. And it's the first time in the history of the company that we ever finished a store, fixtured it, locked the doors, and waited, because we didn't want to open it in 2020, and we also just didn't know what the landscape was going to be. And so we opened our first one, which is in Victor, New York, in spring of 2021, and then a fast follow with a second one in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I think you asked the question, I'm pulling us all the way back to your original question of how are they doing? They're doing exceptional. And those first couple of stores, we treated them as R&D locations. We wanted to understand what would work and what wouldn't. And it's funny because I'm sure many of you know this. Companies love to test. We all love to test. And we love to learn, and we also love to move really, really fast. And certainly coming out of 2020, coming out of COVID, the retail landscape has changed so much. And so as we went into these first couple of R&D locations, we also said, boy, we better make sure that these work. And when I say work, we went into it with the mindset that it wasn't just going to be a test, but that they would be productive, that they would be profitable. We were able to see a profitable spreadsheet in year one of both of these doors. And I think for us, that really gave us the confidence that this was a concept that was going to work. It was being, consumed by our customers. We refer to them as athletes, but it was being consumed. And then from there, we're now at 12. We opened the 12th one 4 weeks ago. And next year, we've got roughly another 10 on the docket, and then somewhere between 75 to 100 over the next 3 to 5 years.
Wow, wow.
And they're chubby. They're 100,000 square feet.
Chubby.
These are chubby little stores. So yes, it's unique from the sense of, it's almost like little stores inside of a store. But when you think about that much square footage, we've opened 1 million square feet this year.
Holy cow. So the key question for me is always like, what do customers say?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think I'll probably have to balance that with a little bit of art and a little bit of science. We've got an app that we use, a piece of software, the Medallia app, that allows us to get real-time feedback, which has been exceptional, especially in these doors, because we can understand not only what they're seeing, the product that they're looking for, and then the service that they're experiencing. And so I think a big piece of these stores is really about community, about being able to invite the community in. You can see the field up here. Out of our 12 stores, 4 of them have a field. And it's interesting because I remember walking early on with one of our strategic vendors, and they said, gosh, how do you think you're going to keep that field full? Because, we've opened stores that have locations in them, and then over time, we're not able to actually actualize any sort of revenue or any sort of engagement. And so for us, the field has been probably the biggest buzz. The fact that there's an opportunity for the community, for teams to be able to use spaces. At the time, I don't think we really understood just how important it was going to be in some of these smaller towns, especially because of not being able to get field time, not be able to get ice time. We do in 3 of the 4 stores, we convert them to ice rinks. The field converts to an ice rink November through February. And so interestingly enough, we had no idea in Minnetonka that there was going to be such a shortage across the Minneapolis area for ice time. We already have the ice time in the evenings completely booked out for this year. And so what we're hearing is, thank you so much for giving us a place to come. It's kind of like that old adage of, you think about Starbucks. They said, it's a place to shop, it's a place to meet, it's a place to work, and that's what we're finding in these spaces. And so customers are really excited, and that's kind of that's the fun, emotional commitment. But then on the other side of that spectrum, typically with our stores, we see customers come roughly right around 20 miles in terms of radius to shop our stores. In these stores, they're coming as far as 50 to 100 miles away because it's a destination. There's enough to do in the store. The average time when you're doing, we call it an experience. So whether it's the field, whether it's the hitting bays, whether it's hit tracks, whether it's the climbing wall. The average time when you're engaging with one of those experiences is about 45 minutes. And so they're voting. They're voting with their footsteps, they're voting with their time, they're voting with their dollars.
Yeah. Okay, so all these lofty goals, turns out good, and we're going to make a lot more of them, and they're chubby.
They're chubby.
And but talk about some of the obstacles in the way, because CEO says, all right, we're gonna put ourselves out of business with this store because it's going to be the greatest thing ever. So right away you hear that and you're like, oh boy, here it comes. So what were the obstacles going into this?
Ooh, as you may imagine, there were a lot of them because we had we had a team, a very small team, some of which folks who had been with the company for 20 plus years, and so I think sometimes folks. Especially when you're trying to do something new, there's always that cast that can go back in their minds and be like, but remember when we did that in store 26, in 1972, it didn't work. And it's like, oh yeah, well, okay. And so, pushing against kind of the concept of we tried it, but in some cases, maybe folks just weren't ready for it, or maybe it wasn't operationalized. I will tell you one of my favorite examples is, and I think it's in the photos, but there's a destination in the store. It's called House of Cleats, and that's where we pulled all of the cleats off of our footwear deck. We dropped it into the middle of team sports because certainly, cleats are a piece of equipment. And there were some early sketches done, and it was like one of my favorite parts of the store. I thought it was very, very unique. I thought it put the cleats, it put the product at the center. It just created this experience that was, wow, this is more than a piece of product. And everyone hated it internally. There's a lot of hate. I'm all about love. I need love, not hate. And so we got to this place where I was like, well, you know what? How about if we just build a section out and we bring it down into our lab store? And everyone was like, all right, yeah, fine. At this point, they're appeasing me. I get it. So we bring a piece in, and first round it's not particularly sound operationally, and Ed, the CEO, we go down to the lab store, and he's got this line that he often uses. When he doesn't particularly love something, but he doesn't say no, what he'll do is he'll be like, well, if you want to do it, go ahead. And there's a shoulder shrug, and I've got to tell you.
Oh, and here's a pistol.
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's like, yeah, it's not very comforting when that happens, but every now and then you're like, but there's something here. So we kept working it. We ended up bringing the entire House of Cleats. So this is 1,100 square feet down into the lab store, and I just so believed in it. And our merchant team was excited about it. Not super excited. We had a long-term individual who had done cleats, really well known in the industry across Nike and Under Armour and Adidas for having really built the cleat business. He actually coined the term House of Cleats probably 20 years ago and had it trademarked and all that good stuff. And he came downstairs to look at it and he was like, well, I don't hate it. Okay, well, that's not exactly a resounding vote of confidence, but for him, it was as good as it was going to get. Mm-hmm. And we actually graduated the House of Cleats from the lab store straight into the first store because the lead times were just that tight. And from there, it easily is the most photographed element in the store. We see it out on social media organically all the time. It is we've got in some of our stores, we're using some technology to track how customers shop and dwell time. It is easily the most trafficked element inside of our space. We actually, on Saturdays, the staffing is it's a zoo. We do team events inside of House of Cleats so that folks can come in and bring their teams in and do try-on events. And so it's just a really good example of, I won't say everyone said no, but they said maybe. And the design team, we just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And now not only is it out there in the House of Sport stores, it's also an example of an element that we're putting back into our existing fleet to keep it new, to keep it fresh. And then I was sitting yesterday afternoon at one of the tables. There's a gentleman over here, and he was like, when am I going to get a house of cleats? And I was like, all right, yes, that little guy he's come a long way. Come a long way.
Okay, so we're talking about organizational obstructions, like, I don't know what department, the design department, somebody says like, I don't know if I like that idea. How do you deal from a human perspective? How do you convince them that this is the way to go forward, or do you sometimes not?
Well, I think seeing is believing. I really do, and that combination of whether it's rendering it out, whether it's bringing it into the lab store, whether it's setting it up in a local store. Sometimes people can't. I think from a design perspective, sometimes you see it in your head. You see the possibilities, and sometimes it's not as easy for everyone else.
Yeah.
A lot of the folks, and we work very cross-functionally, as I'm sure everyone in the audience does, but they're dealing with spreadsheets. They're dealing with numbers. They're dealing, with units. They're very, very science-based. And, a lot of what design is about, and you look at this, it's hydration, it's water bottles. You look at that destination that we call that inside of the store, we call that the collab, and we've had this collab that we developed with Gatorade, and like I said, it's nothing but hydration bottles. But when you see it in that environment, it brings it to life. It's a story. And all of a sudden, you can get a little bit of an emotional connection. And I will tell you, my merchant partners are my biggest allies because, that's what they do. They buy product. They want to sell product. That's certainly what they're reviewed on. And when you can bring product to life in unique ways where people want to actually experience it, you can get allies really, really, really fast.
So you got these guys working for you, got the merchants working for you.
I do. I've got my merchant partners. We do everything, we really do it like this. So, it's a license shop. It's like, okay, that could be jerseys hanging on a four-way. Or it can be a tailgate experience. And so, sometimes they too, they're looking at product, they're excited about it. But they don't always know what it could be. And so bringing them along and having them as part of kind of not only your support system, but your cheerleader, and saying, yeah, this is going to make a difference. It's going to return on the square footage. Makes a big difference.
Okay, so store number one, which is, a little bit more than that. It's a test, obviously, but you're building it. You got the okay, you convinced the people, you got through these obstructions. Some things I'm sure you were told no. Some things were, go ahead and do it, like the House of Cleats and things like that. But now you're going through this, the physical reality of building this thing. So what did you run into when you did that?
Well, it's harder than it looks. Certainly. We've got an audience here of experts, and it's interesting because you look at it and you think, oh, it could be this or it could be that. And I will tell you, most recently, 8. So we're up to 12 now, but 8 of the stores that we opened this year were conversion doors. And that's just a whole different thing. These were doors that had historically been combination stores. They're 100,000 square feet. They were Dick's Sporting Goods and what used to be our Field and Stream concept. So taking those doors and converting them to a house of sport it's pretty invasive. You go from taking taxidermy out of a store to all of a sudden now you've got a batting cage and a climbing wall. It's a big difference. And doing that on a budget is, there's always, we're always going to be governed by that budget, and that is where you start to make trade-offs. And I will tell you, it's the vendor partners that really come to the table and many times help you think about things differently. They're doing things out there across the industry that you may or may not know about because you're you're tunnel vision, you're working on a concept. And so taking those partners along the journey with you as well, because that first one, when it's a ground up, it's It's really easy to make everything just so. Converting doors is a whole different beast.
Yeah. And it is anyway, really, in the whole business. So you open the first one, you bring Ed. What does Ed say?
Well, he was, he was a little verklempt, and he doesn't get emotional. He just doesn't. But I don't think that he had really thought about how far the journey had come from where we were to where we were going to be. And I will tell you, one of my favorite things in the store that really got his attention, and I think that's the important thing about these stores, is that I'd like to think that the DNA of Dick's Sporting Goods is pulled all the way through these doors. But that first store opened, it actually did open across the street from an existing door that was 20 years old. And I will tell you that that store had not seen a lot of love over time. It had not been remodeled. It was a face only a mother could love. I mean, it was really in tough shape. It was tough. But it was one of the early doors, and when you walked in down the entryway, it actually had this massive wood structure that was hand carved that said Dick's Sporting Goods. And so when he bought the company from his father, there were 7 stores, and then store 8 through 20 had this massive hand-carved piece in the entryway. So I thought it would be really cool to somehow incorporate it into the new store. What I didn't realize is they actually had they had built around it. Like, when we took it down, they had to cut it out of the walls. And then it was so large that they put it on dollies and wheeled it across the street for us to put up in one of the hallways in that store. And so that juxtaposition of all of the new experience with that DNA of the past, I think it was a moment for him where he was like, wow, okay, this is the future of how we'll look at our stores, but you can certainly still squint and see the foundation of what the brand was built on.
Okay, so it's open. Ed's okay.
He's happy.
And so right away you're going to start to learn things. When I worked for Les Wexner, he used to say, you don't know anything until you start bringing the register. So you've got some areas that are really working and some that are not working. So House of Cleats works, right? So what didn't work and what did work? And can you say that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I can share. A couple of things. I think I'm going to start with no, I'll sandwich it. I'll tell you a couple of things that didn't work. We had product that we had sourced for the climbing wall. We had this vision because, when you think across the store, when you think about what we sell, it's everything from, entry level to enthusiast. And so we had a lot of enthusiast climbing product that the merchant team had brought in for the rock wall. And we learned very early on that no one wanted that. And what we learned is with the climbing wall that you can see behind me, one of the things about this is you can do both climbs as well as bouldering. You can rearrange the holds. We had this vision that there was going to be this kind of this span of entry level all the way to enthusiasts that would use the wall. What we've since found is it's absolutely family bait. It is all about family. It's about the littles. We do birthday parties centered around the climbing wall. And so that enthusiast product was not even vaguely interesting to anyone because, we kind of equate it almost like when you think about bowling. Yeah. You'll go bowl, it'll be interesting, you'll rent your shoes, but you're not going to go buy the ball or the bag or the shoes unless you're really committed. And so we think of the climbing wall as the same way. And so that was just product that, we had a hypothesis that it was going to operate one way. It turns out that not the case. Also with the climbing wall, we learned early on that it certainly is an afternoon to evening type of experience when school is in because of the amount of individuals that are associated with like I'm in school. Now, conversely, one of the things that I love about the climbing wall and the field is in these locations, the community teams. So we've got embedded community teams in these doors, and they do outreach into the community to help do the programming. And we do a lot of work in these communities with folks who do homeschooling, because you don't really have an opportunity to have a PE class. So they come in, they use the store. So one of the things that we learned is some of the experiences. We thought we'd operate them all day long. We now give our store teams the autonomy to decide what hours these are open, and it's open across each community at different times based on what they've learned as it relates to traffic patterns. So I think, those are things that you think are going to work a certain way when you develop it, and then over time it's very organic. I also used to work for someone who said, you design it and then the customer tells you if you're right. And so we have really started to adjust some of these elements around service as we've learned more about the doors, and then giving the stores the autonomy to actually operate their doors in the way that's most efficient. It also goes back to their labor model and the productivity. It allows them to own that in a different way.
So any bombs where it just didn't work? The wall was an adjustment where you thought one thing and it became another thing, so you can adjust to it. But was there any bombs where you thought, okay, it's coming out, we're going to do something else instead, something that's really working?
You know what? I will tell you, and it's I haven't gotten all the way to rest in peace. I believe it can be resurrected. I just want to say that. We have an area inside of the first 3 stores that we refer to as health and wellness. And when we developed it and we took it through all of the focus groups, it was the one area of the store that no matter what focus group we spoke with, they were like, yes, you could do this here and this and this and this. And it is by far the least productive part of the store. And in part, we've also not been able to get the stores to engage with it the same way. It's not as familiar. It's a variety of products, it's a variety of offerings, and we've not cracked the code on it. So we did not put it in the next 9 doors, but I still have a dream. I have a dream that we're going to continue in these early doors to figure out how to change, whether it's the offerings or the service model or the programming. But as we all know, when productivity isn't there, you make adjustments. So in the next 9 stores, we took that space and we've continued to use them for collabs. That's been a big win for us in terms of working with the vendor partners to come in and have unique launches there. But Little Health and Wellness has not played out like I thought it would.
Oh, that's interesting.
You're sad, aren't you? Deep down you are. Sad.
Good. Did you sell smoothies?
No, we did not sell smoothies because we didn't go all the way. We didn't want to go all the way to figuring out the food and beverage piece. But what we did is we engaged with local juice companies in the area to bring juice in and have that available for the community. It was amazing in terms of those small businesses having an opportunity for them to expand their footprint. But when you think about retail productivity, you've got to sell a lot of juice in order to make that count and make that work. So, like I said, I've not given up on it, but
I think that's wise.
Big learning.
Yeah, I mean it's still going on, still being developed. Mm-hmm. Ohio Health can't figure it out, so there you have it. So, is it getting any easier? You've got a bunch to open next year. You just opened a bunch. What was that number that you told me earlier?
Well, we've got 12 this year, roughly 10 next year, potentially 25 in 25. And so continuing that climb. And so getting easier is, I think that's relative. I think we're getting smarter about how to do it better, how to use technology to do it faster. How to find partners that can move really quickly, be really nimble. Right now, it still feels like they're one-offs because we're taking over unique locations existing locations out in the marketplace. And then, it's funny because I think the same way we ask, every year you ask your stores to comp up, we feel like we have to comp up. So every time we open a new one, it feels like we're adjusting or bringing something new into those spaces. So I wouldn't go all the way to it's gotten easier, but I think we've got a formula in terms of what matters most to our customers and what matters most to the business. And I think, over time, that does help speed it up.
So what's interesting is you opened stores for decades now with different companies. And, we were, for a long time, and I was part of this too, we were cookie cutting. We were just putting out store after store after store. And people would get punished if it didn't look exactly like the other store. So how is this, a little bit of an obvious answer, but how is this that much different?
Yeah, well, it's funny because we have a fleet of 50,000 square foot boxes. So certainly roughly 700 of our doors are 50,000 square feet, and they were cookie cutter. They were certainly cookie cutter. And now we're moving into double the space, taking over unique locations. And you do get somewhat formulaic, but I think the other piece of it is you want to make sure that you are creating spaces that are flexible enough to actually live on way after the time they're opened. I think about some of the doors that we currently have today where everything's like fixed assets. And so it's not nimble, it's not easy to change out. It's not easy to respond to what's happening as assortments change, as vendor partners change. In the big scheme of things, we are a brand of brands, and we've got a tremendous portfolio of vendor partners that love to come into our space, and we want to make sure that everything is really flexible for the future. And so I think there is a component that is that is a little bit cookie cutter in terms of the big elements, sure. But then the rest of it is all built on flexibility. So hopefully, 10 years from now, these stores will be just as interesting and as emotional and as relationship building as we're seeing with the doors we're opening right now.
And not one mention of a robot.
No.
Okay, so thank you. You've been super gracious. Thanks for coming and, finally doing the thing. But I wanted to ask you one kind of softball question, because from where you've been and the other places that you've been, such great cities and all that, and now you're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So how do you like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania?
I'm going to tell you what I love. And so I absolutely love that it's a bit of a Midwest town. It really is. People are kind, and they work really hard, and they love their sports teams, and they're very gracious, and they invite you in when you relocate. Now, when I relocated, don't ask me why, but I didn't have the good sense to actually Google the weather. And it is the third cloudiest city in the US. So when I got off the plane yesterday, I was like a gremlin. I was like, oh my God, what is all this sun? What is all this heat? I was very, very confused. And then I will tell you, transportation in and out of Pittsburgh, you can't get anywhere. There are no connecting flights. So transportation's tough, the weather's tough, everything else is actually quite amazing. It's a sports town. There's a great arts community. Lot of great restaurants. So if you don't have Pittsburgh on your map in terms of somewhere that you might want a vacation, I understand that. But a good weekend, I would invite you for a good weekend.
What is it, bratwurst or?
Oh, they have this crazy. So they have this crazy thing. It's called a Pittsburgh salad. That's kind of their claim to fame, which was a salad with whatever your protein of choice is, and then a pile of French fries. So if you think for a moment that eating healthy equals salad, not when you have a Pittsburgh salad. That's their claim to fame.
Going to Pittsburgh. Okay, well, again, thank you very much. And everybody,
thank you.
Toni Roeller.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.